Former Foreign Affairs Minister Peter MacKay joins us now. A little mumbly after all that from the president there. Wow, that was something, wasn't it? You know, you've been watching it too.
Yeah,
now, until we get the Prime Minister up there with Christopher Fielding, you and I are going to sort of bridge this whole thing.
Sure.
You know, Trump was pretty candid there, and he said the biggest concession for him was making a deal in the first place. I think he was being genuine there.
Yeah, I think that's right. You know, in a give and take negotiation like what we have experienced over the last 13, 14 months, at the end of it all, the only concession really is that they gave up on some of their demands and agreed to take concessions from other countries. So characterizing this as a win-win-win, which seemed to be the narrative throughout on the part of Canada, yeah, all of the wins seem to be in the president's column. Whether it's supply management concessions, whether it's to do with cross-border shopping or the quotum that happens there, whether it's the sunset clause. Now, that was quietly sort of put to one side, but what we have is a deal with a duration of 16 years, which is a long time, but a 6-year automatic review. So I think the more you go through the details of the actual agreement, the more you will see that, for all intents and purposes, we did come out on the losing end. We have to be frank about that.
Sellout? Some people say it's a bit of a sellout.
Well, maybe certainly the dairy sector, the supply-managed sector would probably characterize it that way. And we've seen a whittling away, whether it be in CETA, whether it be in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. So there's concern in our ag sector. You know, to be optimistic, what we see now, hopefully, is a little bit more focus on some of the other issues that we have to deal with, and some stability in the market. Hopefully, direct foreign investment will start to return. Hopefully, Canadian capital will stay put. We have other big structural problems in our economy. If the auto sector tariffs had kicked in, if we saw further disruption in the energy sector, if this deal had fallen apart completely, certainly that would have been of greater concern. So we're at the end of this process. Thankfully, it was a long, circuitous route, but here we are.
Now, Trump can claim this, and he is, as a victory, just ahead of a very important election, the midterm elections. Will Trudeau do the same as he leads into his next election 1 year from now?
Well, we'll know shortly. He'll try. There's no question that this will be characterized as a win for Canada, and we're happy with this. I don't think everybody is happy with it. Relief. Perhaps a sense that it is finally over because it has been a dominant issue here. But there was a lot of politics on all sides. Certainly the Mexican election played into this. The most recent deadline had to do with the handover of power from Peña Nieto to López Obrador, and in the hopes that the Mexicans wouldn't then want to relaunch a whole new negotiation because of the incoming government. The U.S. primaries you mentioned, Trump can go there and say to Wisconsin, critically, you know, we got more access to the Canadian dairy market. Here in Canada, we had the Quebec election, which is being held today. And I think the holdback on supply management till the very last minute probably had a lot to do with that Quebec election. And now we're going into an election cycle starting early in the new year.
And I think that third leg, at least as far as a lot of people are concerned, looking at this thing writ large over the months and months of negotiations that got really nebulous and just, you know, sort of out there, was the Mexican leg of this whole thing. And then when they sort of, you know, did an end around and got that deal with America First, that took a lot of people, I think, by surprise. And, you know, are we the three amigos again? At least are the optics good that way?
I think it's going to take some time, and I think we're going to have to go through in greater detail the actual agreement now, the text, and see what the true impact will be on our economy as in theirs. I think there was a lot of personal bruising and animosity as well between the administrations, and that will take time. I think the overall relationship in North America is enduring. We'll get past this, and there will be inevitable changes over time. But sector by sector, our military to military security relationship, our overall sense of unanimity will come through this intact, is my sense.
I think just the term national security threat, when it was framed that way, I think that's stuck in the craw for a lot of Canadians. That you know, we have this special relationship with our friends in America. To be considered, even for a moment, a national security threat in any way, I think that really rubbed us the wrong way.
Yeah, rightly so. But I think you have to look at it from a perspective that what was truly being said here is the Americans don't want to be reliant on anybody in a national emergency for the ability to arm themselves. And so on the tariff and aluminum tariffs, which, by the way, are still in place.
Yeah, well, there you go.
And that's another element that has to be sorted out. I think what they were saying is not we consider you a threat, that is, you're an actual threat to our security, but being reliant on you for certain supplies to build tanks and planes and armament, we need to retrench. And that's this whole inward-looking, America first approach that we are seeing from a very polarizing president and a president who, no doubt, plays hardball.
We can see in the small box just below us here that the Prime Minister is making his way to, I presume, the podium where he will be speaking with Minister Freeland very, very shortly. Do you think, Peter, this helps to smooth over some of the sort of, Trump dumping on Minister Freeland as well? Really going hard against the progressive internationalism and the globalist sentiments. It's been NATO. It's just one after another. NATO, the EU, the UN, G7. Do you think we're going to have just better general relations with them?
Well, one would hope, and that's not a clear answer, and time will tell. But some of the irritants, perhaps because of NAFTA, will now dissipate. His going after other international institutions is worrisome, to say the least. We've destabilized, I think, a lot of the trust that was built over years and years of persistent positive contact. Even the recasting of this as the U.S., Mexico, Canada agreement. It negates the fact that it's about trade and it was free.
Yeah.
So
no free there. No, not even fair, which was what Trump really wanted.
Free and fair.
That was the big word for him was fair. That's not even in there.
So, he's had his way, and he will be able to go to his electorate, his base, and say, we won. But the relationship, look, we've seen ups and downs in the relationship at the top in the past. Nixon notoriously didn't get along with the Prime Minister's father. Diefenbaker and Kennedy had a rough relationship. Even going back further, Johnson and Pearson. So this too shall pass. But it has been a bit unprecedented for a generation of Canadians to see the President of the United States call our leader weak and dishonest, to see our foreign minister singled out in such a way. Now, there's no question that there was some behavior, let's say, on behalf of the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister that irritated the President, rightly or wrongly. Words used, meetings attended. Some of the Foreign Ministers perhaps chastising, lecturing of the U.S. administration did not sit well with the President or his team, including Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer.
And I got the sense from President Trump today, because if anything, this is his purview. He does have a history with and understands. You can tell he was very lucid today and had a very good grasp of the people, the places, the things, the names, a very good grasp of what he was talking about today. And he did give a strong sense that I get the feeling anyways, that this kind of north-south trade war that was kind of happening. Now it's going to give way to east-west. He's really going to focus on China and Europe now. That's where the problems are for him.
He's had a lot of boiling pots on the front burner. This one, he hopes now, is behind him. You're right to suggest that, when it comes to business, when it comes to trade, righting what he considers to be injustices in terms of the U.S. economy and deficits, I have no doubt now he's going to focus very much on China. He is going to focus on perhaps pursuing and also tweaking some of the other trade relationships that he has as leader of the United States. So, yeah, he's in his realm. He's absolutely in his wheelhouse when he's talking about the economy, at least in his mind. He's a New York real estate mogul who has lost and perhaps gained millions and billions over the course of his career. And he's very comfortable with elbows up, dealing with what he believes are competitors in a harsh and very braggadocious way.
How genuine was he being when he said that, Trump can oftentimes, sort of a lot of hyperbole there. He'll even say it, that today saying that, no one talked to Brazil, no one talked to China. Once I actually sat down and said a couple of things, we got somewhere. Is it something that simple? There just wasn't dialogue happening?
I don't know if I buy that necessarily. That could be said of North Korea. There was not a lot of direct contact with North Korea, and that is another area where he charged boldly in. I mean, he was even declaring on the weekend that he was in love with Kim Jong-un, which was a kind of a bizarre characterization. But nobody would say that this president is sitting back, is being sedentary in his role. He has very much upset the world order. The United States economy, let's be frank, is on fire.
Sure is.
The job market there, they're becoming energy independent. They are seeing certain benefits from these trade relationships being recast as far as their economic stability. So, how will that affect his electoral and political fortunes in the future? It's hard to say at this point. But boy, if there was an election held tomorrow in the United States, I like the president's chances of getting reelected.
And he was smart to sort of conflate him with Congress. He goes, that's me. As long as it's GOP, vote that direction.
Well, that's an interesting point. If I could interrupt.
Yeah, sure, please.
The composition of Congress, which will have to basically approve this new trade agreement, is yet to be determined. And traditionally, Democrats have been even more hawkish, let's say, against NAFTA. And, now they may also, were they to gain control of either house, attempt to delay it or drag it out as a means of holding up the president's agenda. So there's an interesting political dynamic yet to play out there. We haven't seen those trade tariffs on aluminum and steel removed yet. And hopefully the auto sector, of course, is going to be kept intact. That seems to be the more positive outcome for all countries. But the specter of more tariffs doesn't seem to have completely disappeared, is what I'm reading.
Yeah, and as the dust settles with this deal, it is going to be so much about China. And his trade czar, Peter Navarro, he really sees all this as a zero-sum game, right? For America to win, someone else has to lose. And,
Correct.
And given the books he's written, this dystopian documentary about the future of China as a war being waged over trade, AI, intellectual property, weaponized data. Basically, the Pacific is the theater of conflict for the future trade war, and that's coming right from Trump Central.
It is, because Navarro, I think, is the inner voice of Donald Trump. He relies very heavily on Peter Navarro for trade advice and advice pertaining to the Asia-Pacific. And look, China, there is plenty of documented evidence of how hyper-aggressive they've been in terms of building islands in contested waters in the South China Sea.
They've been a bad actor on a lot of levels, right?
They certainly have. The cyber. We talk about Russia, but the Chinese are heavily involved in cyber as well. They've been disruptors on other levels in terms of building ports and infrastructure in other countries. They have a very stated intent through this Road and Belt Initiative. And the other that is of real relevance and importance to Canada is the Polar Silk Road, which is their intention to do a lot more shipping through the Arctic, the high Arctic, and internal Canadian waters, in our estimation, in the Northwest Passage. So, we don't want to be left behind in this focus on China. We need to be there. We need to have those discussions. And I'm sure further talk around the Trans-Pacific Partnership inevitably leads back to discussions with China about our economic relations and ties with them.
And this is an economy that's been growing, 10% for 3 decades.
As is their military.
As is their military. And it's all going to overtake America as the world's biggest economy. That's a given, right? It's not an if, it's when.
I think that's right. Yes,
and that means something.
They have made rapid gains in comparison to the United States. The United States still is a dominant force, let's be clear.
Sure.
And in terms of our own trade relations, 75+%. That's why, it's a good place to register the fact that we need to diversify our trade, not just with China, Asia Pacific, but other countries. Pursuing free trade with Great Britain makes perfect sense, maybe low-hanging fruit. But yes, the United States sees China as their principal competitor when it comes to economic dominance.
Now, the TPP, it did open up supply management to Canadian farmers, right? So there is kind of a big deal sort of framework as
There's
a precedent.
There's a precedent there.
Is there appetite, or is it possible within the agricultural lobby to strike, unilateral side deals outside of the scope of this deal? Is that legal? Can they do that? Should they do that?
Well, I think given the changes that they have had thrust upon them, let's say, because of Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement, the European Union, TPP, now the new NAFTA. I don't foresee that happening. They're going to be coping with these changes within Canada, and it leads to the question of compensation. And I think we'll hear more about that perhaps today or in the coming days as to what the Canadian government is willing to do to compensate for potential losses, because it won't be immediate. This is going to be incremental.
Right.
This will happen over time. But it is a threat to the agriculture sector to see this protected supply managed system now slowly whittled away.
What do you think other countries are looking at and thinking today? Like Iran, for example, who were the brunt of Mr. Trump's ire at the UN. How this affects their psychology for how they're going to deal with the rest of the world on many levels, socioeconomically too, not just trade.
Well, uncertainty, an unconventional president, but the consistent message, I think the takeaway is that he is prepared and does follow through on threats. Unfortunate that that is the way that he conducts himself, but for the Iranians, seeing him rip up the nuclear deal with them, impose sanctions again, this has to be a reality check for Iran that they're not dealing with the Obama administration now. If they choose to try to dupe this president or push him around, he will retaliate. And one certainly hopes we don't see a military escalation, but he hasn't been reluctant to do that, follow that route either. Let's not forget, within a few short weeks of taking office, there were airstrikes inside Syria.
Yeah. Real airstrikes.
Real airstrikes.
Not threats, not tweets. Yeah. Statistically, American manufactured, the country manufactured twice what it did when NAFTA was signed in '84 with a third of the workforce. So it's not always 100, it really isn't 100% about trade and tariffs, is it? It's about, and not all jobs went to China and Mexico. Automation. Isn't automation a far bigger culprit? And as long as Trump continues to divest in green energy, renewables, and invest in fossil fuels, isn't that a problem too for America?
It is in terms of its competitiveness, there's no question. And yes, the president has railed against jobs being exported to both Mexico, China, Canada, pick a country. It really is a product of automation and robots doing the jobs that humans used to do. It's particularly true in the auto sector,
Absolutely.
but across the board in manufacturing. Manufacturing is an area that Canada has to be concerned about in terms of our competitiveness and our productivity. And increasingly, one comes back, at least in my mind, to the future of the energy sector here. Part of our diversification and being competitive means being able to compete now with the United States when it comes to energy. That means pipelines. That means our ability to get one of our most valued products to market. And that means not just sending it to the United States, but getting it to the European Union, getting it to markets that can use clean Canadian natural gas. Right. So there's many, many moving parts right now, and we're sitting, on the top of North America, hopefully now in a more stable position as a result of this deal. But there are still other threats to our economy that we need to be cognizant of.
How does this affect trade between provinces and regions in this country?
Well, not directly, other than it keeps the flow of trade that all provinces have with the United States and Mexico. But the interprovincial trade barriers that have existed for years remain an anomaly and remain a challenge, I think, for all provincial, territorial, and federal governments to try to contend with. We have some very antiquated views in some cases of how we do trade internally. Yeah. And it's kind of bizarre in the mind, I think, of many that you can get wine in from California, but you can't get wine from Niagara into Newfoundland and Labrador with the same alacrity.
Never made sense, really. Yeah.